Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will be splitting my time with the member from South Okanagan, West Kootenay. I look forward to his impressive speech. Today I rise to speak on Bill C-44, the Budget Implementation Act. This bill is deeply flawed, in my opinion. By the end of my speech, I think it will be very clear why I won't be supporting this bill. In its 290 pages, it amends over 30 separate acts. Despite all of this, it does very little for the middle and the working class. Once again, the Liberals have put the interest of their friends ahead of those of the vast majority of Canadians. On the one hand, they are eliminating the public transit tax credit, and on the other, they are facilitating the purchase of public infrastructure by private investors. You know, Mr. Speaker, last week I had the honour of having a conversation at a small business in my riding called Townsite Brewing. It's a great microbrewery in Powell River. Their innovation, dedication to the community, and obviously the great beers they make have been a real builder in their local economy. But sadly, the 2017 budget is not working for them. They asked me to raise this important issue, and I hope that the minister will hear their calls. The federal budget will raise the excess tax for beer, wine, and liquor by 2%, and then it will tie it to the Consumer Price Index. This means that the price will rise for the consumer every single year after that. That is simply not good for business. There are a number of really good reasons for the government to stop this. There are hundreds of small brewing companies in communities across Canada, employing people, using local ingredients, innovating with new styles of beer, and investing in their business to sell great beer and participate in a very competitive market. This is truly amazing when you look at the history of beer monopolies of the past. Consumers now have more choice. This industry creates great local jobs. For Townsite Brewing, it creates 16 meaningful positions in the community. Across Canada, small communities have worked very hard to diversify their economies, and this hits these communities particularly hard. Brewing is one of the few remaining industries that is domestic. 85% of the beer sold in Canada is made right here in Canada. Not too many food industries can make this claim like the beer industry can. Shouldn't this government support the growth of this share to 90 or 100% rather than discouraging growth by imposing higher and higher taxes on these products? The entire brewing community and their customers are united in wanting to see the government make the decision to repeal this tax before it becomes law by the end of June. In my riding of North Island Powell River, this tax will impact as well the wine and liquor industries that I have. As I mentioned earlier, this bill amends more than 30 pieces of legislation. I found it very interesting when a member across the way said, I don't support omnibus bills, while supporting this omnibus bill. Almost one-third of the changes are nowhere to be found in the budget. During the last election campaign, the Liberals promised to abolish the use of omnibus bills because the practice is undemocratic. The omnibus bill should have been split to allow Parliament to conduct in-depth reviews of the changes affecting the Parliamentary Budget Officer and the creation of the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. This bill clearly shows that the Liberals put the interests of their friends ahead of those of the vast majority of Canadians. On the one hand, they are totally forgetting that people across this country desperately need infrastructure in their community. So when they created the Infrastructure Bank, the government is giving a green light for privatization of our public infrastructure. As Mark Hancock said, the national president of CUPE, if you're an infrastructure banker or a billionaire tax dodger, today is a good day. For hardworking Canadians, not so much. Bill C-44 is mute with regard to the number of details that would have to be clarified in future legislation. Some provisions suggest that the Infrastructure Bank will be entitled to use the Access to Information Act to withhold important information from the Attorney General of Canada and the Parliamentary Budget Officer under the guise of sensitive commercial information. Canadians expect accountability. It should therefore be established by the means of a true bill and an exhaustive review by Parliament, and not through an omnibus bill. When it comes to accountabilities, Canadians can count on the Parliamentary Budget Officer as he plays a fundamental role in Canadian democracy. and his work depends on his neutrality and independence. It appears, however, that the Liberals want to make his job much more difficult. The Parliamentary Budget Officer would be required to produce an annual work plan, which would be approved by the Speakers of the House of Commons and the Senate, as well as the government member who chairs the Finance Committee. This is the only officer of Parliament who would be required to seek approval for his work plan. The PBO analysed the legislation framework applicable to the parliamentary budget officers in 17 other countries, notably Australia, Great Britain, Austria, Belgium, and so on. According to his research, it is most unusual to require political approval for a work plan. Such a procedure would not only benefit the government because the PBO could not undertake a study on his own unless it has been included in his annual work plan. In addition to submitting an annual work plan, the PBO would have to provide his research results to the Speakers of the Senate and the House one business day before it's made public. How is that accountability? Furthermore, from now on, only committees and not individual MPs and senators, as is currently the case, would be able to request that the PBO estimate the financial cost of any proposal that relates to a matter over which Parliament has jurisdiction. Any request for research from individual MPs or senators would have to be related to a proposal, bill, motion, or amendment that they have made. It is this type of individual request that led the PBO to research the costs of the F-35s and the Liberal tax cuts that only benefited the wealthiest. Adopting these changes will reduce my ability to hold the government to account. It will lessen transparency to Canadians. This is a budget that fundamentally betrays the commitment to creating a more accountable and transparent government. Mr. Speaker, this bill also has a huge impact on veterans. I'm happy to see that there is an investment in additional support for veterans' social reintegration and transitioning. I'm pleased to see the creation of an education and training benefit, for example. However, I am deeply disappointed that there is no mention of re-establishing lifelong pensions for injured veterans, yet another broken promise from the Liberals. Overall, there is little movement, and most promises for veterans have had to wait for the next year's budget. Veterans have waited long enough. David Flanagan, Dominion President, Royal Canadian Legion, agrees. He said that, bottom line, this budget doesn't do enough for our veterans and their families. How long do veterans have to wait? This budget did very little for the military either. When it comes to our military, they have become extremely good at finding efficiency in everything that they do. Over the last decade, there comes a point when you simply have to feed the people who need it. It is time to invest in our women and men in uniform. New Democrats believe that our troops should have the support, training, and equipment they need to do the difficult and dangerous work they are asked to do every day. Only with a well-trained and well-equipped military can Canada continue to play an independent role in the world in promoting peace and security. This budget did not provide any resources for the military to do this. I know we're all waiting for the National Defence Review to see if more is coming, but most importantly, the military is waiting. Seniors' issues are not a central part of this budget. Yesterday's CBC headline was, and I quote, "We're so far behind. Canada unprepared for housing needs of rising seniors population." This was a reference to the census figures. Canadians need a long-term plan, something this government doesn't seem to want to invest in. There has been an investment of some money for drug costs, but it still is not providing seniors with the real help that they need. They're making decisions between eating, buying their medication, or paying their housing costs, and that's shameful in a country like this. A national senior strategy is needed now. C-44 makes our government less accountable and sells public infrastructure that Canadian taxpayers have built to Liberal insiders. When a housing crisis is happening in this country, when our seniors, veterans, and military need help, I can confidently say that this budget bill offers Canadians a series of misguided priorities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member made reference to long-term planning And I think that we have seen a government that has taken a very proactive approach at long-term planning. We see that in multi-year budgeting. We see that in terms of the plan working with our provinces, with the CPP, with the price on pollution. These are all things that go years ahead. She made reference to our military. As a former member of the regular force, I am so appreciative. I really believe that the current Minister of Defence has done more in terms of ensuring that we have longevity and our forces and the needs of our forces are going to be met by having this review over the last number of months. We are finally putting into place, because of this Minister of Defence, a long-term plan. But going to the budget specific, my question to the member is, because she has had colleagues of her own that have been somewhat critical of the idea of long-term planning, because we look at whether it's housing, infrastructure investments by this government. It means a long-year plan means multi-year budgets. Does the member across the way believe that multi-year budgets is a good thing?
The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank through you the member's very interesting question. I look forward to actually seeing a long-term strategy that will meet the needs of people across this country. You know, the reality is we have a seniors crisis right now. We've seen the poverty rate of seniors grow dramatically in the last several years. We know that there's not enough housing for them. We know that home care is still something that they're struggling to see happen. You know, when I think about long-term plan, it's also about having a strategy that people understand. So where is their national senior strategy? We're all awaiting it.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member from my fellow British Columbia for her speech. When I was in Halifax last, Mr. Speaker, I spoke to a microbrewer who had been one of the early, I think he started in the early 80s, and he said that back in the 80s there was probably about 60 microbreweries right across Canada. Today, there is well over 600. And for such a rapid increase in microbreweries, I asked him why. And he said that the Harper Flaherty budget of 2007, which started seeing excise relief for microbreweries, caused a whole game to change for microbreweries in Canada. This government is actually adding more excise tax. And not just that, Mr. Speaker. They are doing so because they don't mind paying their fair share. But now they've added an escalator where year after year, regardless of where inflation is at, it's just going to lockstep up, which, again, there is also the GST on top of it, making their product more expensive. And let's not forget that provincially there's excise tax as well. So, Mr. Speaker, would this member agree that these kinds of increases, particularly the fact that it's an escalator, is not only less democratic and transparent, it actually is going to hamper that industry, both wine, beer, I'm sure spirits as well, though I haven't heard from them?
The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for this very important question. The reality is there's over 650 microbreweries across Canada. It's a growing and prosperous industry, and I think it's really important. If you look at the reality of so many very rural ridings like mine of North Island, Powell River, where we had a very strong industry, usually in logging and mining, forestry, and whenever those boom and bust cycles happen, it's had a huge impact. So you see these wonderful industries coming in, and they're building the economy. They have good paying jobs. They just want to keep succeeding. Like I said, in the community that I serve of Powell River, 16 meaningful jobs. That may not seem like a lot to the Liberal government, but to the small communities of Canada, those are meaningful jobs that mean that people get to live and prosper in those communities. I think it's shameful that there was absolutely no discussion. There was no moving forward. And I think this comes from a government that also backed away from its promise to give less federal tax on small businesses. Where's that 2% cut? So, you know, small businesses are doing their best in our communities. It would be nice to have a government that actually consulted with them. I hope that they change their mind. It's just the right thing to do.